All right, welcome back for another one. Today we have another fantastic guest. We have Zac Townsend, who is the CEO of Meanwhile. We had Jason on a little while back, and he gave you guys the skinny on how the product works and what they're cooking up over there. But I thought it'd be really good to go and get it from the main man himself. So love to have you. Excited to have you here, Zac.
Great. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely. So for the people that may not know what Meanwhile is, I'm sure that there'll be some people that didn't catch the first podcast with Jason. Can you give them kind of a high level and then maybe your background and like what gave you the idea?
Sure. Yeah. So, Meanwhile is a life insurance company for the crypto economy, specifically starting with Bitcoin. So, life insurance probably sounds somewhat boring, maybe not very interesting, but it's a fundamental financial service, and life insurance companies do life insurance, they do annuities, they do retirement savings, they do all sorts of different things. And in the United States, life insurance has a pretty privileged tax position. So as folks, get wealthier, they have more complex financial needs. They are doing tax and estate planning. Often, life insurance comes up, and we wanted to create a life insurance company native to the crypto economy, both because we think that's a great way to attack the life insurance business, which is like percent of global GDP, and we just think that the world is going to increasingly go toward crypto, toward digital assets, toward these durable sources of value, and we are building a company that's like growing into that. So that's Meanwhile.
Love that. Yeah, I think that you guys are on the bleeding edge of what this is going to look like over the long term. Um, but I'm sure that you've had to deal with like regulations and
Yes.
will partner with you. So, where did this kind of start? I mean, did you have a need? Like, did you have a bunch of Bitcoin that you thought, I want to structure this in a way for my kids? Or like, what's the backstory to
Yeah. I did have a bunch of Bitcoin and was sort of thinking about it. I mean, my backstory very briefly is, I moved out to Silicon Valley, San Francisco in 2013, um, basically because I wanted to work on financial technology. And my background is uh, grew up very working class. My dad was a postman. I tested into a fancy high school that then, launched me to an Ivy League school. But that entire experience, particularly going to college, I was like, wow, there are rich people in the world. And like, wasn't a rich person. Like, how do you build wealth and how do you think about that? Um, all the way down to like financial inclusion and things like that. So that's what I decided I wanted to work on, and I really was just on Hacker News, which is like Y Combinator's forum, and was like, "What's the best fintech company I'm hearing about?" And that was Stripe. So I moved out to San Francisco in 2013, and I was employee like 37, 38 at Stripe.
wow?
Um, and I got really interested in building infrastructure. So in the like worst financial decision of my life, but maybe the best like life decision, I applied to Y Combinator. I got into YC. I left Stripe, and I built a company in the sort of like financial infrastructure space. We sort of invented like what now they call like banking as a service, bank account as a service. And we were just way too early, but like ran that company for 2 or 3 years, sold it to Silicon Valley Bank, which was a going concern in 2015. Just to be clear, no signs of distress. Um, and I actually received my first Bitcoin then because one of the other offers we had to buy Standard Treasury was from Coinbase because they were really struggling with like financial infrastructure. So here's another opportunity where I could have a few $100 million, and I went a different way. But so I received my first Bitcoin from Brian, like in a meeting. So this is not uncommon for this era, but like Brian was just like sending people $200, $300 worth of Bitcoin on Coinbase so that you would open an account. So that's like my original stash is there. Um, And I'll sort of fast forward, I do a bunch of other stuff. I, work in another fintech unicorn. Um, I worked for the state government of California for a year, et cetera, et cetera. But like along the way, I was sort of just dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin, missed the whole ICO boom. And eventually I come to like late 2021. And to your like question, I actually sat down and said, I'm really comfortable with regulatory bullshit. Like that's like a comparative advantage I have against all my crypto, you know, Bitcoin friends, um, like I come from I sort of more trad fintech, I guess. I don't know. That's not a term, but so I literally was at a whiteboard and I'm like, okay, this is an economy. Like that is my mental model for crypto. It's a weird economy, right? It's global, it's decentralized. There are elements of or optionality around self sovereignty. That's really cool, but it's an economy, and you could think of it as like crypto land with its economic system. And there are certain financial institutions that every economy has, and I made a list. So it's like, okay, there are banks and there are asset managers and there are payments companies and there are trust companies and there are exchanges. And I actually looked at that list at the time in 2021 and it was like, a lot of these things, they already exist. And basically a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I'd been thinking about life insurance like separately for years. Um, I woke up in the middle of the night, like 2 in the morning. I was living in Austin at the time. And I was like, "Oh my god, there should be a crypto life insurance company." And I went to my office, 'cause it's like, during COVID, and I wrote the entire memo that is like what we raised our seed round on. And we're now 4 years later, and basically we've done what we said we were gonna do. I sort of understood that we wanted to be a life insurance company. I understood that, if you're going to save for 3, 4, 5 decades, we think saving in Bitcoin makes a lot of sense. And we understood that we were going to start by selling to people who were really concerned about the tax benefits, and then we were going to expand internationally. And the reasons that people buy the product internationally are a little different, right? So it tends to be less about tax benefits in the U.S. and tends to be more about political risk or jurisdictional risk or currency or inflation risk, right? And then like we hope to systematically move down market over time. Like my ultimate dream is, you're a middle class person in Argentina. You right now you do not save for your retirement. You do not buy a life insurance policy because the Argentinian peso is going to die before you do. Um, and so that's the ultimate dream is anyone in the world can save, can protect their family for, the extremely long term in these global decentralized stores of value.
That's incredible. Yeah, well, I love the light bulb moment. Like, I don't know if I operate the same way you do. Like, I write all these things down and I look for opportunities and I'll rack my brain. And then either when I'm meditating or I'm like completely asleep, you wake up and you're like,
Yeah. No, it's just like, flash of genius or whatever.
yeah, it's an epiphany.
Really like
Yep.
shoot out of bed. I think that's right. I think the best innovations um are often just at the intersection of a lot of your own thinking, of the world's thinking.
Mhm.
And I think you process that stuff subconsciously. I don't
Yep.
know if you can like reason your way to um some special insight that's across boundaries.
Yeah. I think divine download or whatever you want to call it, there's been a lot of things that have happened where people have completely revolutionized an industry and it's a completely new technology. It's disruptive. And what I think you guys are doing is that, right? Like you're saving in an asset that's hard. Gold's not going to have the same type of appreciation or rate of appreciation. It also doesn't have a lot of the same potential benefits that Bitcoin does. Um, I mean, they mine more of it. Bitcoin's finite. So all of those things kind of lead to a really good financial product that you guys have created, and you've done it in a very unique way. So I mean, you had to do this offshore. Like the U.S. government's not going to let you do an insurance policy not in dollars, right?
We're working on it. Well, actually, what's weird, I guess, is to really get to the nitty gritty of insurance is insurance is regulated state by state. It's very unusual, actually. The federal Congress passed a law in the late 1940s that basically says we will not regulate insurance and it'll be left to the states. Um, and they're naturally very conservative, even I guess like small c conservative. So even states you might expect like Texas or Florida or Wyoming that might want to do something in crypto, it's sort of a hard road. So yeah, we went offshore. But having said that, like Bermuda, many of your listeners probably aren't aware, but it's not in the Caribbean. It's like 1,000 miles east of North Carolina, truly in the middle of nowhere. And it's barren rock, and they've like had to create an economy. And the economy they've created is like being the offshore insurance capital of the world, right? And you walk around and there's no poverty. It's not like an island nation you might think of. There's just these huge buildings, Chubb, Munich Re, Swiss Re. So this is a very well respected like center of insurance activity. But I think we're quite fortunate that although they are really respected and they have this really interesting, they sort of have respectability and equivalence in the United States, and they have respectability and equivalence in Europe, and there's a little bit more permissive. That's like their shtick. They want to be just a little bit more permissive, so you want to be there, but like not so permissive that they like get hit with a sanction or something like. So that's like the role they play. So if you want to do really wild stuff, you can go to Cayman or BVI. Bermuda is like trying to be, I guess, the closest to offshore, but like have a big enough difference. And but they also do a lot of stuff in crypto, right? So Coinbase's offshore operations are there, Circle's offshore operations are there, uh, Block's offshore operations are there. Um, FTX's operations were not there; they were in the Bahamas because they're too good a regulator. So we understood pretty early that it was a great place to be, and it also is just we're starting to sell to people, in Hong Kong and Singapore, or through Hong Kong, through Singapore, through Dubai, through Switzerland, and they all know and respect Bermuda. Um, we're working on some legislative work in states in the U.S., so maybe we can get to come here. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but let me just say one more thing, which is, um, but the whole thing works for U.S. people for two reasons. One is there's a Supreme Court decision from the 1890s, which just is so long ago, but it's actually about life insurance. Now, how people can buy life insurance from whomever they want. So you have like this, I don't know, God-given constitutional right to buy life insurance. We don't have the right to sell it actively. So you won't see billboards. We don't run like Twitter ads. I mean, that's sort of how it works. Like people have the freedom to come to us.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, not PM. And I got the policy. And the other thing is, it's just also just a fluke that the language in the Internal Revenue Code. So this is like the tax code. The language they use around life insurance doesn't use the word dollars or like use the word cash. They defined all of the requirements using the word like value. So it's about ratios and things like that. So that's how we've been able to create a life insurance policy entirely in Bitcoin, right? So you pay us in Bitcoin, we pay you back in Bitcoin, and we just follow these rules and ratios so that users get the tax benefits. And look, we could just not have a company, like when they were drafting this legislative language in like 1986 as part of the Reagan, like second Reagan tax cuts, it could have just been different. But it isn't. So we're able to like run this life insurance company offshore, and for it to be an incredible benefit to our users.
Yeah, I think you guys are providing a service that a lot of people would want access to. So would you say like Bermuda, again, they have some tight controls, but they're a little bit more progressive? Do insurance companies trial things there before they bring them on?
Yeah, they have a sandbox, which is what we went through, and then we graduated to a full commercial license. I would say in general, right, like Athene, which is owned by Apollo, and Global Atlantic, which is owned by KKR, and Northwestern Mutual and Mass Mutual have like reinsurers and sidecars there. Um, I'd say they're pretty conservative in general, but they're it's instead of it being a rules-based regime, which is like how US regulation works,
Mhm.
it's more like I forget what it's called. It's a like prudential regime. Basically what that means is you can just go have a conversation with them. And the conversation we had with them is, hey, yeah, Bitcoin is really volatile relative to the dollar, but we want to run an entire company in Bitcoin. That's what we do. So we accept premiums in Bitcoin, we pay claims in Bitcoin, we do our financial statements, our audited financials, the regulatory filings. We do everything in Bitcoin. And because of that, we're all matched, right? So the price of Bitcoin, I don't even know what the price of Bitcoin is today, which is like my pleasure of thinking about, um, you know, I just know the price of Bitcoin is going to be more in 50 years. But anyway, whether Bitcoin is 30,000 or 130,000 or 90,000 or whatever it is, we match all our assets and liabilities, and we do all our regulatory filings in Bitcoin. And we went to them, and we presented that to them at like the earliest stages, and we said, "This is going to be safe. It's going to be safer than if we like ran a dollar company and like overlaid Bitcoin." So we were able to have that conversation. But actually, except for that fact, which is that we're in Bitcoin instead of dollars or euros or yen or Swiss franc, the company is incredibly conservatively run. Like we're very conservative on underwriting. We're very conservative on like what we do with Bitcoin. We use Anchorage, which we consider like to be the like conservative. Well, Anchorage and Coinbase, and we consider those to be like the conservative options. Our actuarial assumption, like in some ways, or not in some ways, how we presented ourselves to the Bermuda Monetary Authority, which is regulators, we said, we're going to run like the world's most boring life insurance company in every regard,
Except,
except it's going to be in Bitcoin. And they were open to that.
well, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense because if you would think people that have escalated up the risk curve and are in crypto are going to be much more down the risk curve on that side. But for you to kind of pull that back and say, look, like we want to do this the right way. We want to set a high standard. We want to be, the poster child for this, and we want to make sure it's done correctly. All of that's going to be super conservative. We just want to denominate it in Bitcoin so people
Correct.
can, fund in kind and redeem in kind, and the cash payout or the life insurance pays out in kind over the long term. And you guys, Tim, really,
We have a joke that life insurance is the original HODL.
that's funny. It's pretty good.
Uh, but it is in that mantra, or that not that mantra, that mindset that uh yeah, in some ways I find there's no one more conservative than like a Bitcoin whale. Like they're way out in the risk curve on Bitcoin. But also I think from their perspective, and actually the perspective of a lot of people in crypto, it's like, well, the dollar is failing like over time. Uh, so Bitcoin makes a lot of sense. And before we started recording, Jake, I know we were talking about XRP.
Mhm.
What I find interesting actually is I find that even people who are, I don't want to say maxis, but people who are like big holders of XRP, people who are big holders of BNB, people who are big holders of ETH or Solana. I know these are all like different things. They do different things, but like, um, I find that almost all of them still tend to have like 10, 20, 30 Bitcoin. And we just sort of speak to that and say like, hey, you're planning to hold this forever. You're like, this is about intergenerational wealth or like pristine collateral. And that's like why we run a life insurance company in Bitcoin. And, we just have all sorts of different users from uh, Bitcoin maxis to like general crypto folks or maxis and different things. And then now we're starting to have a ton of just like standard issue family offices who are saying like, wait, BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, they're saying have 1, 2, 3, 5% of your net worth in Bitcoin. I don't, I want to put this aside, sort of have this as an inflation hedge, a currency hedge, a political hedge. um, so this like offshore Bermuda based life insurance policy, like completely matches that need.
Yeah. Well, and so how much you guys done multiple rounds for your stuff? I know y'all raised and you got some big backers early on. Are y'all going to continue to raise capital, or you're pretty much good at this point? Like,
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been very fortunate on the capital side. So that's the advantage of having a big idea.
mhm.
So our first seed round was co-led by Sam Altman and Lockie Groom and a bunch of other people. Dylan Field from Figma, Parker Conrad from Rippling, um, Mod from Mercury, like just a who's who of Silicon Valley types. Um, so that was like I guess seed one, and a lot of those folks, they like don't necessarily, I guess, care a lot about life insurance, and some of them care about Bitcoin, and some of them don't care about Bitcoin. But fundamentally, our pitch is like we want to build the world's largest life insurance company. We think we can reach 1 billion people, with digital money, and then we're using AI and automation to like build a life insurance carrier. So for a while there, we were an operational, like functioning life insurance carrier, and we had 8 people. Um, so that was the first round, like Sam and a bunch of others. Then we had like a second seed, which was very institutional. So it was like Santander, Northwestern Mutual, MS&AD, which is a big Japanese life insurance company. These amazing insurance investors in New York called Hudson Structure Capital Management. So there's a lot of insurance folks. And the reason we did that is because we knew we wanted our A to be from crypto folks. And the crypto folks sort of can't underwrite, like, whether we're doing doing the actuarial math right. So we want to have a bunch of insurance people on the cap table, so everyone knew that like when these insurance. And then we just had an amazing year last year. So in February last year, we raised a Series A, and that was co-led by Folger and Framework. So Folger is are like Bitcoin maxis. They only invest in Bitcoin. They, are the biggest backers of Blockstream, Sigmund Bank. They're like Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. They think everything else is garbage. um, and then they co-led the round with Framework, and Framework is like one of the premier firms in like DeFi. So like big backers of Aave and Maple and you know, Chainlink, and they've done just extraordinarily well. And they had never done a co-investment, and we like love this like two angles of it, right? So there's like Bitcoin Max, we have a lot of Bitcoin maxis, and they like know and love Folger, and then we have a lot of like people thinking about the future of financial services through crypto and DeFi, and we have Framework. So that was the A. The two of them plus Wences, who's like been called patient zero of like Bitcoin in Silicon Valley. And then about halfway through last year, we had some people who missed their A, like they looked at it but decided not to do it. They came to me in the summer and they said, you know what, we made a mistake. Like you're gonna be one of the most
Make more money.
like ever. um, um, like, do you want more money? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I've got years and years of runway, but we'd love to go get a credit rating. Like, if you want to fund like our big ambitions, um, and so then we ended up raising another $82 million in August, and that was Bain Capital, Han Ventures, is just amazing, and Pantera were like the big three. and then Apollo and Northwestern Mutual invested as well. So, yeah, we have some great backers. Uh, I guess to your question about if we're going to need more money, I guess we don't need more money. I've got 8 years of runway or something. But if there's someone listening who wants to fund hugely ambitious ideas, like we're always open to a conversation. But yeah, we're pretty set now. We've gone from 8 people to 23 people. We're still a pretty tight team. We're very careful about hiring. And we're continuing to deliver amazing stuff, I think, for policyholders, but also for our investors.
Yeah, I think y'all are crushing it and will continue to crush it on that side. The way that you guys generate the return on Bitcoin is pretty unique. And Jason kind of went over that in detail in the first podcast I had with you guys. But at a high level, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm going to take my shot at it. The miners have a bunch of low basis Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And so you guys lend them the Bitcoin to be able to sell so that they can fund their operations without having to liquidate that early Bitcoin. And they pay you back in Bitcoin with an additional 3%, 4% type of return. Accurate?
Yeah. So I guess I'll abstract that a little bit and say, we just have some unique benefits of being a life insurance company, our regulatory positioning, our tax positioning, and just our long-term focus, right? So I think we've been very fortunate that many counterparties have come to us and said, like, I have these problems, I have these needs, and I want a counterparty that can be on the other side for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, right? And, there's so many people in crypto that I, have deep respect for, whether those are market makers or hedge funds or, trading desks or protocols or whatever. But most of the system is very focused on like today and liquidity. And we have the great fortune to be all about duration and all about thinking for the long term. And we're fortunate our policyholders trust us for the long term. And then that's the role we can play in the economy. So one of the roles we play is, yes, there are folks who have low basis Bitcoin. It's not just miners. It could be individuals. It could be family offices. It could be institutions. It could be DATs, depending on when they started, right? Most DATs are underwater, but, some aren't, right? So there's this quirk in the tax code, right? Which is that Bitcoin is property.
Mhm.
What that means is if you want to do something productive with Bitcoin, it's probably taxable, right? You want to take Bitcoin and you want to pivot into MicroStrategy. You want to take Bitcoin, you want to make an in-kind LP contribution to a hedge fund. You want to take Bitcoin, you want to put it on Pendle, the term lending platform. If you have a conservative tax position, all those things are taxable, right? Because you can't in-kind your way out of capital gains tax. But otherwise, we'd all be bartering everything all the time because that would be a way to avoid taxes, right? So we are able to provide a service to folks where they put their Bitcoin in a segregated like wallet as collateral, and then we lend them fresh, current tax basis Bitcoin, and we charge 3% for that. It's great for both sides because it's like credit risk free, right? So you send me 100 Bitcoin, I put it in a wallet that you can see. I take away 3, so now you have 97 there, and I send you back 97 different Bitcoin that you can do with what you want. So these Bitcoin for Bitcoin loans, yeah, we do them for all sorts of people. And again, we find that, it might not, there is some novelty here. Like we have a tax opinion from a fancy law firm, and like there's a lot of structuring to make this all kosher. But at the end of the day, I think our counterparties trust us to do this, over a OTC desk or whatever, because when we say, hey, we can be on the other side of this for a year or 5 years, they believe us. So yeah, the bulk of our lending is this like Bitcoin for Bitcoin lending. And, we're not trying to get 7% returns or 17% returns, or like people try to do a lot of crazy stuff in Bitcoin. We're trying to get like steady 3.5% returns, and passing that on to our users like year over year over year, to meet our obligations.
Love that. Yeah, I think that that's a very conservative and easy model to continue to perpetuate over time, right? It's nothing.
Yeah, we also find that Bitcoiners, the only thing they love more than Bitcoin and self sovereignty is, they really hate taxes. So our life insurance policy tends to be very attractive, and our parity loan policy tends to be very tax attractive. Although for the government listening, these are all careful tax. This is about tax. What's the word? Tax optimization. And also, I'm not your tax advisor.
Well, I'll put the disclaimer in here for us. If you need any, financial, tax, or legal advice, always seek out a professional that's licensed in credentials to be able to provide that for you. Everything said here is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Well, as we wrap up here, you've accomplished a lot. There's a lot of awesome things that you guys have already put together. What are you most excited about here at 2026? Like, is there something on the roadmap that you can share with people, or, just continue to be a boring, really cool life insurance product for Bitcoin?
Yeah. I'd say the biggest like obvious thing we're working on is we're expanding internationally, and there's just a lot of like underwriting, and there's a lot of jurisdictional conversations with this insurance authority or that insurance authority. But that's going well. We hire the global head of distribution and marketing from Sun Life International, which you could think of as like the preeminent offshore fiat life insurer. So we're dealing with some of the best brokers and family offices and private banks all over the world. So if folks are listening and they're not an American, they live in basically anywhere that isn't a blacklisted country. So you live anywhere but Russia and Iran and not North Korea. We're beginning to serve those people, and have a product designed for them. So I'd say that's like the real push in 2026. I'd say when we look out a little bit further in the year, starting to think about deferred annuities, which is like another tax structure. And also, our users really like our boring, conservative, long-term perspective. And I think we're thinking about ways to support them on that. Maybe the big one would be we've begun conversations about maybe starting our own trust company in Bermuda, which again is like a really respected offshore jurisdiction, because I think trusts and life insurance policies of this type like often like really just go together. But that is this quarter thing that if we get that going, it'd be the end of the year. But those are the sorts of things we think about. Not really. I joke sometimes, we're running, as I said, we're running a life insurance policy we're running a life insurance company like from the 1830s. We're just doing it in Bitcoin. And that's how we think. So we're very deliberate about making like simple, straightforward products. They're comprehensible by folks. And then just doing it with, the world's greatest store of value.
Love that. Well, if people want to learn more, I'm sure we'll have the links in the show notes below, but anywhere they can reach out specific that you'd want people to be able to find?
Yeah, so you can go to meanwhile.bm. BM's the Bermuda top level domain. And I guess what I'd say to people is, if you start the sign up flow, you're not agreeing to send us Bitcoin or signing a legal contract. And every single person who begins that flow, they enter their they enter their email, their password, they give us some demographic information. A human being from our side will reach out to you. This is a big decision. We have people who send us tens, hundreds of Bitcoin, like tons of value. It is a big decision. It is not a decision that gets made, um, just over, I don't know, over a web form. So you begin the sign up process. Me or Jason or another guy on our team, Danny, like we reach out. Often people have questions about the trust. They already have a trust, or they have this stuff onshore, this stuff offshore, or like what are the tax benefits, or can you talk to my accountant? Blah 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 blah. So we do all that stuff, and you should think of it as a pretty uh, one-on-one experience, and you can get to know us. So that's what I'd say is, if you have any interest in the product, you want to learn more, like I'd sign up on the website, and someone from our team will reach out to you.
Love that. Well, thank you again for taking the time, explaining everything for our audience, and wish you the best of luck here in 2026 with the international expansion.
Thanks so much, and wish you luck on all your endeavors and podcast for the new year too.
Love it. And you guys, that's it. We'll see you on the next one.